For more on Canada-Japan relations and what to expect from Shinzo Abe's visit, I'm joined from Toronto by Christine Nakamura, a Vice President with the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada and a former Canadian diplomat who served in Japan. Ms. Nakamura, good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So what do you expect to see on the agenda when Prime Minister Abe meets with Prime Minister Trudeau this weekend?
I think there's a number of issues. I mean, first and foremost, Japan is hosting the G20 this year, so it's not unusual for the leader of the host country to make his rounds and visit the member nations prior to hosting the event. So I suspect part of his visit will be to talk about the G20 coming up in Osaka this year, and about the themes that they hope to discuss. But more importantly, this year marks the 90th anniversary of Canada's presence in Japan. In 1929, we opened up our first legation, and so it's a celebratory year for Canada-Japan relations. So it's an auspicious year for us, and I think part of his visit has to do with that on the bilateral side. But as well, as you know, the CPTPP came into force in December last year, and Canada and Japan are the top two largest economies in the agreement, and I think that there will be some discussion as to reaffirming the commitment to increasing trade and investment and growth of our economies due to this new agreement.
Now, when the negotiations concluded on that agreement 18 months ago, of course, there were reports of some seeming diplomatic tension between Canada and Japan over the final stages of that negotiation and certain changes that Canada was pushing for. Is there any residual effect from those talks now in 2019?
I don't believe so. I think that Japan and Canada have great relations, and you know, there's been a number of times that our leaders have met, most recently, as you know, in November 2018 at APAC. So I don't think there's anything to be concerned about at this point.
So talking about CPP and trade, you know, it might get overlooked in Canada because we also often focus on our trade relationship with the United States, with the European Union, with China. But Japan, of course, remains the world's third largest economy. It's one of Canada's biggest trade partners. Now, Japanese officials have been pressing the case for even more trade. So what would an expanded trade relationship look like with Japan beyond what we've seen so far in CPTPP?
Well, I think that, you know, given the strength of Japan's economy, as you mentioned, it is still the third largest economy in the world. And Japan has been a long-lasting, and our relationship trade-wise has been an enduring one. So I think that the CPTPP can only enhance the trade relationships with Japan. I think that in the past decade or so, there's been a lot of emphasis on emerging economies in Asia that have strengthened tremendously. And perhaps Japan has kind of been put on the side burners for a while, but I think it's very important for Canada to not forget Japan, and I think Japan realizes that as well, that Canada is a very important partner. For Canada, as you know, Japan has the largest foreign direct investment in Canada, with just under 30 billion in investments in Canada, so it's a very significant trading partner, economic partner to Canada. So I think that things should only improve now that the CPTPP has come into force.
Okay, so let's move from the economic relationship to security. And it's been suggested that perhaps Japan would like to see more defense cooperation between Japan and Canada. Can you talk a bit about what is the impetus for that push?
Well, I think that it's important to, you know, Canada and Japan are both soft powers. And certainly Canada, now that we've also re-engaged with the UN, Japan sees Canada as an important soft power country that they could, the relationship is very important because we're both multilateralists, and I think that they see it's very important to have Canada on side with them to work. We're both democracies that really put a lot of strength into the importance of the rule of law. So I think to Japan, Canada is a great partner in all respects, not just economic, but political security as well. So I think that's where they're coming from.
And so what are the biggest geopolitical issues and challenges in East Asia and in the Asia Pacific that are kind of serving as the backdrop for the meeting between Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Abe? Is it China? Is it the Korean Peninsula? Is it the role of the United States in Asia under the Trump administration, or is it a combination of all three together?
I would say it's a combination of all three. Certainly, the Korean Peninsula, there's always concerns there. Despite recent meetings and summits between the American leader and Kim Jong-un, there's always concern from Japan's perspective as to peace and harmony on the Korean Peninsula, because it's a close partner, it's a close proximity to the Korean Peninsula. So I think it's very important from that respect. And of course, the relationship with the United States is key. So I think on a number of issues, with us being north of the border and our relationships with the United States is very important. I think Canada is seen as a very important partner on all fronts, not just the Pacific Rim, but because of our relationship with the United States.
And of course, one of the biggest stories in recent months in terms of Canada's diplomacy in Asia has been the dispute with China over Huawei, over the detention of 2 Canadians in China. In terms of that relationship between Canada and China, the relationship between Japan and China, and to complete the triangle, the relationship between Canada and Japan, how do you expect the leaders to focus on that?
It'll be interesting, definitely, but I think that perhaps the issue of China may come up, our relationship with China, but again, it won't be the first time that a nation has had, some political issues with China, and certainly Japan understands those. So maybe bilaterally there may be discussions. I'm not sure if it's going to come up at the G20, but certainly there are concerns, I think, globally on certain tensions that are brewing or have been brewing behind the scenes for a while.
All right, well, certainly no shortage of issues to look at, whether in security or on the trade front. Christine Nakamura, thanks so much for your thoughts today, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you.